Lack of context or clarity, again, external. And this comes up a lot in like white papers that we read, textbooks that we read, these materials that are really put out there as fact, right? And so this hits home for us often because this is the way people learn, right? This is how we learn things as a society. Students are reading these, in some cases children, in some cases adult students, or even a white paper that's put out. It has this authority to it that we take it as fact. It has data in it. So anything with data, we're taking at face value, and it is adding to the collective narrative of our society, and being sort of part of that socialization of people. So we take it very seriously because it holds a different weight than just my opinion, or even something on a website where we know something on a website can be created. This takes on a gravitas when we put it in this context. So we often see in some of these things just lack of clarity in general, that there's not really a point being made, or there's painting with these really broad strokes. And again, as we get into the process of this identity lens, when we audit something like this, you'll often see our comments throughout are, who are you talking to? Like, who is this for? What do you mean by this? Because there's this broad approach taken that humans, and maybe specifically humans in the United States, have a very similar experience. Humans in North America have a very similar experience. And so there's these broad strokes that really uphold a dominant narrative, where we have to pick that apart and say, like, who is this for? Who is this meant for? Who did you have in mind when you wrote this as the author? Because it's not clear, but it is clear that you think there's a shared truth here, which may or may not be true. We also see, again, we give authors in these cases a lot of power, and we see a lot of bias come through that author or subject matter expert lens, a lot of bias within there, where whether it's something that is like clearly pushing a narrative or an outcome, even in medical texts, we see this, right? Where it's very clearly biased towards, for example, we're talking about women who are body feeding or infant feeding in general, but then everything points to you must breastfeed, right? No formula. And it is all driven towards that from that author's point of view. And there's no one to really offer a counter narrative to that, or there's not context that's offered inside of that. We're all being driven by that one point of view. And that hits really hard. And again, the weight of it is very heavy as well. A couple other things that we've seen in that is there's a report, a white paper about the Affordable Care Act, which drags Republicans through the whole thing as a group. And regardless of any individual's political leanings, it's very biased. It lands as very biased, and it discredits the whole paper because it's talking about this whole group monolithically, as opposed to maybe individuals who pursue different policy paths, subgroups of people within that group that may have had different agendas. It paints with this broad brush, and it really dilutes the impacts of the overall article because it feels so biased through that author's point of view. And then probably one of the biggest things that we see, and personally one that I think causes the most harm, and like, again, unintentional, but I think it's one of the most prevalent things we see. When we include a data point in any of these things that correlates identity with an outcome. So LGBTQ people experienced more mental health crises during the pandemic than non-LGBTQ people. Black children need more intervention throughout early childhood education, these kinds of things. When we let that sit on its own without context or conjecture, we are doing damage, right, to the narratives. Because when there is a disparity in identity and outcome, it is the result of a systemic inequity, because people are biologically not worse or better than other people because of an identity. So when we don't add that systemic inequity in the context, we allow the reader to walk away with either thinking, oh man, the system is really messed up if we're having this disparity, or LGBTQ people are have more mental health issues because of the fact that they're LGBTQ. It's not because of the fact that they're LGBTQ. It's because of the homophobia, transphobia, all of those things that we see that they deal with on a daily basis. If we don't name that, we've allowed a confirmation bias to take place, wherein Black children or children of color aren't as smart, right? If we don't name that the reason that they need more interventions is because of the system and the things that have impacted them. So anytime there is a disparity in identity and outcome, it has to come with context or conjecture. Sometimes it's not part of a study. They didn't study that part. We can't just insert something we didn't study. There's still an author or subject matter expertise responsibility to say, what hasn't been studied here is the causation, or all of this just reports this correlation. What hasn't been unpacked is what's beyond the scope of this chapter. These kinds of phrases where we're at least not letting it lie that this might be a group problem or an identity issue that comes because of their identity. It is not, right? It is not because of their identity. So we see that all over the place, and we really urge folks to sort of build that muscle to point that out when you do see it, to be layering in that context and conjecture around why certain data points exist. We're not arguing with the data is the data. And in our society, in the US specifically, that is so reliant on quantitative data and less reliant on qualitative data, but so reliant on quantitative data, without that added context, it's very irresponsible, and it can be weaponized and really continue this feedback loop within our narratives here.